welcome back to the Unfiltered Political Lens podcast. Today we're going to get into it like always, but first I want to tell you this is going to be a longer video than normal, so I hope you stay with me through it all, and we're going to get right into it. Here we go. There comes a moment in every life when the noise fades, not because the world was grown quiet, but because something inside you has gone still, heavy and uncertain. In that stillness, we all begin to recognize the weight that you've been carrying, unmet expectations, delayed dreams, and silent questions that echo louder than anything around you. And in that moment, you were forced to confront not the world, but yourself. Raw, unfiltered, and honest in a way you may have avoided for a long time. You begin to feel stuck as if life has placed you in a rut that is so deep that even the idea of climbing out feels unrealistic. Days blur together and motivation disappears. Even simple tasks feel heavier than they should. But this isn't laziness, it isn't weakness, it's exhaustion of the mind and spirit. What happens when hope has been stretched too thin for too long? At your lowest point, vulnerabilities is no longer a choice, it becomes reality, and it strips away the illusion of control you once thought you had. You see yourself clearly, flawed, uncertain, searching for something you cannot yet define. And while that can feel terrifying, it is also the beginning of something important. Now, because in that space of heaviness, a question begins to arise within you. What now? It's simple but powerful because it means you are still here and still aware and so capable of choosing something different, even if you don't yet know what that looks like. And that realization, small as it may be, is the first spark. By being in a rut is not a failure of character, it is often a transition, a space between who you were and who you are becoming. It feels like stagnation because growth rarely feels comfortable, and while it's happening, there is a danger believing your current state is permanent. That belief can trap you more effectively than any external obstacle, but nothing in life is truly fixed. Everything shifts, including you. Your lowest moments do not erase your worth, and they don't cancel your potential. They are chapters, not conclusions. And within those chapters, there are lessons you cannot learn anywhere else. Clarity does not arrive all at once, and it builds you up slowly through reflection. It asks you to look at yourself and your life without judgment but with honesty, to question patterns and decisions and beliefs that you brought or you thought you had. One of the hardest parts of being stuck is not the situation itself, it is the voice in your mind telling you it is pointless to try again. That voice will replay your failures, amplify your fears, and convince you like us, have that staying still is safer than risking more. But that voice is not the truth. It is fear speaking through your exhaustion. Progress rarely begins with a breakthrough, and it begins with something small. Getting up when you don't feel like it, trying again when you want to quit, and taking one step instead of all of them at once. And those small actions matter more than you even know. They seem so because they are. It's how the momentum is built. There will be days where you feel progress and then days where you feel like you are slipping backwards. But both are part of the process of growth, which is not linear. But if you continue imperfectly and consistently, you will begin to notice something changing. What once felt impossible becomes manageable. There is strength that only comes from being broken and choosing to rebuild anyway. It is not loud, it is not dramatic, it is quite steady and real, and that strength stays with you. Vulnerability too begins to change, meaning it stops being weakness and becomes connection to yourself and to others. It allows honesty, support, and understanding to enter your life again. And yes, there will still be setbacks, moments where the same feelings return, and times when you doubt resurfaces unexpectedly. But those moments no longer define you. They remind you of your progress, because eventually something shifts. It starts slowly at first, and then you notice small things again, a moment of calm that doesn't feel heavy, and a task completed that reminds you you're capable of most anything, a conversation that reconnects you to something outside your own thought. And slowly those moments begin to rebuild the structure where there was once only weight. Climbing out of a rut is not about erasing what happened, it is about integrating it and understanding it and learning from it. Even the difficult parts contain information about your limits, your needs, and your truth. And when you stop resisting that, you start moving again. Excuse me. But there is something important to accept. External circumstances may not change immediately. Life does not pause while you heal, and that is why the shift must begin internally. How you respond and how you think and how you move through it. That is where discipline enters. Not punishment, not pressure, but a steady commitment to yourself when emotions are unstable, persistent, and a discipline alone is not enough. Without compassion, it becomes harsh, and you must learn to treat yourself with patience, not judgment, accountability without cruelty, structure without self-destruction, because the real process exists in that balance. There will be moments where the gap between where you are and where you want to be feels overwhelming, and I can assure you in those moments the answer is not to look further ahead. It is to focus on the next step only. Not the entire climb, just the next movement. You also begin to realize how much your environment matters. Your habits, your surroundings, your influences. Not everything is in your control, but more is there's more to that than what it seems. Letting go becomes part of growth. Too old expectations, outdated identities, even relationships that no longer align with who you are becoming. And while that can feel like a loss, it is also space being created. Because the growth requires room. There is a paradox here. You must be willing to face the discomfort to move forward and grow. The very emotions you once avoided become the path through it. Fear, uncertainty, vulnerability, they stop being obstacles and they become a training ground. Over time, success begins to shift, meaning it becomes less about comparison and more about an alignment, less about perfection and more about consistency. So I said persistence. And that shift frees you from standards that you never truly were yours in the first place. Time also begins to feel different when you cannot reclaim what has passed, but you can shape what comes next, and that creates an urgency, but not panic or purpose. Not everyone will understand your changes. Growth often disrupts expectations, but staying aligned with yourself sometimes requires being misunderstood temporarily. And as you continue, your trust will rebuild not through promises, but through action. Every time you show up for yourself, belief grows stronger. Gratitude begins to appear not because life is perfect, but because you understand the contrast. You know what it feels like to be lost, so moments of clarity matter more. And yes, there are cons to this journey. It can be exhausting and it can feel isolating. It requires patience, most people underestimate, but it also builds, and it builds something that cannot be taken away from you. Eventually, your reactions change. What once overwhelmed you now challenges you, and what once paralyzed you now moves you into action. Healing becomes less of a destination and more of a practice. And one day, that rut that once defined your life becomes something you remember, not something you live in. You begin to see clearly you were never as stuck as you believed you were becoming. And when that realization settles and everything shifts again, you stop asking why this happened, and start asking what this is. What is this teaching me? That question restores power and it turns the pain into perspective. You learn that not every thought is true and not every feeling needs to be followed. Not every fear deserves control. And with that awareness, you begin sharing your life more intentionally. For healing is not always visible. Some of it happens quietly, internally, without recognition, but it is still progress. And even on inconsistent days, change is still happening. You see, you build tools like reflection, rest, discipline, awareness, and you protect your energy. You become like more intentional with your attention. You pay attention to stuff more accurately. And like a slow confidence grows, not because everything is certain, but because you trust yourself to respond now. You begin to accept the uncertainty instead of resisting it, and you adapt instead of freezing. You move with life instead of against it. And when you look back at who you were at your lowest point, you stop judging them, you understand them, you respect the fact that you kept going. You also realize something important. You were not by your worst moment. I'm sorry. You are defined by what you did after it, how you got up and succeeded. And over time, the fear of falling back no longer controls you, not because it is impossible, but because you trust yourself to rise again if it ever happens. That is real resilience, not perfection, not absence of struggle, but the ability to return. And in that truth, you honestly realize something simple but powerful. Even in your lowest state, there was always something in you that refused to give up. And that is part of you is still here. Stronger, now aware, now more grounded than before. And no matter how deep the next challenges feels, you already know the truth. You can rise again. And as we come to the end of today's message, if this spoke to you in any way, if it met you where you are, or gave you even a moment of clarity, don't just leave it there. Here, take a second to like, share, and subscribe. It truly helps this message reach more people who might be sitting in their own silence, feeling like they're stuck in a place they can't escape. And to everyone who stayed until the end, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Unfiltered Political Lens podcast. Your time, your attention, and your presence here genuinely matter. We'll see you in the next video. Peace.